The fluorescent lights of the school hallway buzzed overhead as Amara Jenkins walked toward the principal's office. Her steps were slow, heavy with a mixture of dread and defiance. She had been called in during third period, again. Her classmates watched her go, some with smirks, others with pity. No one spoke. No one ever did. Principal Hargrove sat behind his massive oak desk, his fingers laced together, a scowl already forming before Amara had even entered the room. "Miss Jenkins," he said without looking up, "have a seat." She did, quietly, carefully, knowing how little room she had for error in this school. Eastwick Prep was a prestigious private academy, known for its gleaming glass walls, its robotics labs, and its reputation for shaping tomorrow's leaders. But for Amara, one of only 4 black students in the entire student body, it had never felt like her school. She was here on full scholarship. Her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep up with the books and uniforms the scholarship didn't cover. And yet, to some staff, Amara's very presence felt like an inconvenience. "Do you know why you're here?" Principal Hargrove asked, finally looking her in the eye. "No, sir," Amara replied, her voice even. He pulled out a paper and slid it across the desk. "Your science teacher reported an unauthorized project submitted for the upcoming fair. She claims the scope is well beyond the approved list." Amara blinked. "It's not unauthorized. I submitted the proposal 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Blanchard signed off on it." Hargrove narrowed his eyes. "She says she never saw it." "That's not true," Amara said, her voice rising before she could stop it. "I emailed her. I even have the timestamp." The principal's expression hardened. "Miss Jenkins, you are already on academic probation for disciplinary issues." "You mean for defending myself when another student called me," she began, but he cut her off. "And this behavior does not help your case. If this pattern continues, we will be forced to reconsider your place at Eastwick." The words hit her like ice water. Her place. As if it were a privilege, not something she'd earned. As if she hadn't stayed up for nights learning about particle acceleration and electromagnetic propulsion for her project. As if her brilliance was somehow a threat. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "So, you're saying I can't present my project?" "You can submit a simplified version, something more manageable," he said with a condescending smile. "We don't want to overwhelm the judges." "Overwhelm them? Or outshine the others?" Amara stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "Thank you, sir. I'll make sure my project is ready." He nodded, seemingly pleased he'd put her in her place. But what he didn't see was the fire in her eyes as she turned and walked out the door. She wasn't going to scale it down. She was going to make it impossible to ignore. Amara sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, her laptop glowing beside an open notebook filled with circuit diagrams and messy equations. The hum of the old oscillating fan was the only sound in the room besides the quiet tapping of soldering tools. Around her were scattered bits of copper wire, breadboards, and the slowly forming shape of something far more ambitious than anyone at Eastwick expected. Her mother peeked through the door, rubbing her tired eyes after a double shift. "Still working, baby?" "Almost done," Amara murmured, not looking up. Her mom stepped in, glancing at the tangled wires and blinking LEDs. "You sure this isn't gonna burn the house down?" Amara laughed, but it was tired. "No flames, promise. Just a little electromagnetic magic." Her mom raised an eyebrow. "You know I don't understand half of what you say, but I do know this: whatever that principal told you, you don't let it shrink you." Amara paused. She hadn't told her mom about the threat of expulsion. About the words "your place at Eastwick." She didn't have to. Her mother could always read between the lines. "I'm not backing down," Amara said quietly. "This project. It's not just about science. It's about them seeing what I'm capable of." Her mom leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Then you build it. Show them who you are." As the door closed behind her, Amara refocused. She had designed a prototype of a kinetic energy generator that could convert foot traffic into usable electricity, small scale, but innovative. If installed in hallways or subway stations, it could power lights, charge devices, or feed into a grid. Something real. Something useful. But Mrs. Blanchard, her science teacher, had conveniently forgotten about the proposal. And Principal Hargrove wanted her to keep it simple. As if her ideas were too big for this building. So now, she worked in silence, every wire she connected a quiet act of defiance. Each LED that flickered to life was a whisper, "I belong here." At 2:14 a.m., Amara sat back and watched the small capacitor glow with power drawn from a simple step on the panel. It worked. Not perfectly. Not without flaws. But it worked. She smiled to herself. The judges wouldn't be overwhelmed, they'd be astonished. The morning of the science fair arrived with a storm on the horizon, both literally and metaphorically. Gray clouds hung heavy over Eastwick Prep as students filed into the auditorium, wheeling in poster boards, prototypes, and glossy trifold displays. Parents mingled near the coffee tables, judges reviewed clipboards, and Principal Hargrove paced the floor with the intensity of a man preparing for a donor tour rather than a student showcase. Amara arrived alone, her project carefully packed in a reinforced case she had salvaged from an old instrument box. Her palms were sweaty, her nerves raw, but her eyes were focused. This wasn't just a science fair, it was her stage. Her proof. Her answer. She found her assigned table at the far end of the room, deliberately placed near the back, she noted, and began setting up her equipment. She smoothed the handwritten placard that read, "Step forward, renewable energy from human movement." By 9:15, students were halfway through their demonstrations. Robotics buzzed and whirred. Posters boasted about Bluetooth integrations and drone-based delivery simulations. Amara checked her capacitors one more time and took a breath. Then something strange happened. Her panel, the main component that harnessed the kinetic charge, wasn't responding. She pressed down. Nothing. She flipped it over. Wires had been pulled, cut, cleanly. Her heart sank. This couldn't be a mistake. She had checked it 3 times last night. She had finished it. It was working. Fully functional. Now it was dead. She looked around, but no one met her eyes. The student next to her, Jared, a senior with a smug look and a gleaming smart sprinkler system, gave her a half-smile and turned away. Her hands shook. No teacher came to check. No supervisor asked why her demo wasn't running. Mrs. Blanchard walked by, glanced at her half-lit display, and didn't say a word. Sabotaged. Ignored. Invisible. Amara clenched her fists. She could walk out. Cry. Break down. It would be easy. Instead, she pulled a marker from her backpack and quickly wrote on the white panel next to her project, "Ask me how this works, and why it matters." Then she stood tall. When the judges approached her table, she didn't flinch. She explained every circuit, every design decision, every mathematical calculation behind her concept. She spoke of energy equity, sustainability in underserved communities, and how every step taken by overlooked people could help power the world, if only someone paid attention. There was no device glowing beneath her feet now. But Amara did. And the judges. They were listening. By mid-morning, the auditorium had shifted into a hum of polite conversation and polite applause. Judges moved from table to table with routine smiles, most students regurgitating memorized scripts with nervous grins. Teachers circled like satellites, subtly steering the judges toward their favored protégés. Amara stood at the back of the room with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, trying not to show how hard her heart was pounding. She had nothing left to present but her voice. And when the panel of judges, 2 professors from the local university and an energy consultant from the city, stopped in front of her half-lit booth, something shifted. They weren't smiling by default. They were curious. Amara didn't wait for them to ask the usual "So, what's your project about?" Instead, she stepped forward and spoke calmly, clearly, with quiet intensity. This panel was meant to show how foot traffic, simple human movement, can be harvested and converted into usable electrical energy. It's been done in small-scale studies in Tokyo and Lagos. But I built a cost-efficient version that could work in schools, subways, or refugee camps, anywhere power is scarce but people move. The judges leaned in. "I was sabotaged this morning," she added without emotion. "The wires were cleanly cut. This system worked yesterday, and I have logs and footage from my home tests. I can't show you the panel now, but I can show you the math, the blueprint, and the reason it matters." She unfolded her diagrams, some hand-drawn, some printed, and laid out her process, how the energy was stored, the voltage limits, how she had solved the inefficiencies using piezoelectric sensors salvaged from old devices. She pointed to footstep energy outputs and calculated load storage. She showed them everything. At first, the judges were silent. But then one leaned forward. "You built all of this on your own?" Yes. In my bedroom. With scrap materials. On zero funding. And you're how old? 16. The consultant from the city stared at her with wide eyes. You realize a working prototype of this could completely revolutionize urban planning for green buildings, right? Amara nodded, but said nothing. Her confidence wasn't arrogance. It was earned. Around them, the room was beginning to quiet as others noticed the intensity at Amara's booth. Students craned their necks. Teachers paused. Principal Hargrove, halfway through shaking hands with a donor, turned and narrowed his eyes. Amara stood still, arms at her side, not smug, not smiling, just grounded. One of the university judges finally spoke. Miss Jenkins, would you be willing to present this to the District Energy Initiative Board next month? She blinked. Me? Present? Yes, he said. We need this kind of thinking. And more importantly, we need people who've been told they don't belong, because clearly, they do. For the first time that morning, Amara smiled. From across the room, Principal Hargrove watched as the three judges shook her hand, handed her their business cards, and asked for copies of her notes. And for the first time in his tenure at Eastwick, he realized he had underestimated the wrong student. By the end of the day, the winners were being announced from the stage in front of neatly lined rows of folding chairs. Students whispered nervously among themselves, families sat at the edges of their seats, and Principal Hargrove stood beside the microphone with his trademark politician's smile. Amara didn't expect to win. Not after what had happened that morning. Not after presenting her work without a functioning prototype. Her goal had never been the trophy, it had been to be seen and heard. But when the second-place winner was announced and it wasn't her, something in the room shifted. Even Jared, whose smug sprinkler system was supposed to take top honors, stopped smirking. All eyes went to the final envelope. In first place, Hargrove announced, pausing with just enough self-importance, goes to a student whose innovation showed not just brilliance, but vision. Amara Jenkins, for her project, Step Forward, Renewable Energy from Human Movement. Gasps. Applause. Then, silence. Amara didn't move at first. Her name echoed through the hall, and for a second, she wasn't sure if she had imagined it. But then Mrs. Blanchard, the very teacher who'd ignored her earlier, turned and clapped, trying to hide her surprise behind a tight-lipped smile. Amara rose and walked slowly to the front. The applause grew louder, hesitant at first, then growing. Some students clapped out of respect, some out of guilt. The judges stood as she approached the stage. Principal Hargrove handed her the plaque without looking her in the eye. His smile was still fixed, but now it looked more like discomfort than pride. You've made Eastwick proud, he said through his teeth. Amara took the award but didn't thank him. She turned instead to the audience and bowed slightly. Her voice was clear when she spoke into the mic. I hope we start listening to the ideas that come from the margins. Sometimes, that's where the future lives. The room fell into thoughtful silence, broken only by applause that rose from the judges' table and swept through the crowd like a tide. Later that day, as students packed up their projects and the gym cleared out, Amara noticed Hargrove speaking in hushed tones to Mrs. Blanchard. His face was red. She didn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. It wasn't remorse. It was damage control. He never approached her again. There was no apology. No acknowledgement of what he'd threatened. No mention of how her project had been tampered with under his watch. But as she walked out of the auditorium with the plaque under one arm and a judge's business card in her pocket, Amara realized something important. She didn't need an apology to validate her worth. Because everyone in that room now knew what she was capable of. And that would echo louder than any words he never said. The Monday after the science fair, Eastwick Prep's hallways buzzed with a different kind of energy. Students whispered Amara's name not with mockery, but with a mix of awe and confusion. Teachers who had never noticed her before were suddenly all smiles, asking about her remarkable project as if they had supported her all along. Even the school newsletter featured a glossy photo of her on the front page, although they cropped out the broken wires on her table and never mentioned the sabotage. Amara kept her head down. She didn't care for the sudden shift in tone, the artificial warmth from people who had looked through her for years. But there was one thing she did care about, the email sitting unread in her inbox. Subject line, City Energy Board invitation, urgent. She opened it in homeroom, her heart thudding. They wanted her to present Step Forward at a sustainability summit in just 2 weeks, to city planners, engineers, and venture capitalists. A space she had never imagined herself in. She sat quietly with that reality, then slowly began to draft her reply. Yes, she would attend. Yes, she would bring her notes. And yes, she would rebuild the prototype. Stronger. Cleaner. Sabotage-proof. That night, her mother cried quietly over dinner, not because Amara had won, but because her daughter had stood her ground. Her father, normally quiet and skeptical of institutions, nodded once and said, "Make them remember your name, baby." She would. And the school would, too. By midweek, whispers were spreading beyond the student body. The local news station ran a short feature titled "Teen Steps Toward Renewable Energy," and suddenly Eastwick's Board of Trustees wanted to meet with her. Principal Hargrove called her into his office, this time offering her a seat and a tight smile. He spoke in careful, patronizing tones about second chances and how the school takes great pride in student achievement. Amara didn't speak much during the meeting. But she noticed the slight twitch in his eye when she mentioned she'd been invited to speak not just about her science, but about her experience. That got his attention. "You plan to talk about the school?" he asked, voice guarded. "I plan to talk about the truth," she replied. "And how we treat potential before it becomes success." That was the last time Hargrove summoned her. As the summit approached, Amara's days were spent rewiring panels, perfecting formulas, and writing a speech, not just about energy, but about resilience. About the invisible power of belief in oneself. About what happens when a black girl from a quiet corner of the hallway is finally handed a microphone. And when she would stand in that grand hall downtown, facing people who shaped cities and funded futures, she knew one thing for sure. This time, no one would dare cut her wires. Because they wanted her to light the room. The City Hall conference room was nothing like her school's gym. It was sleek, filled with polished wood, glass walls, and people in tailored suits who rarely looked impressed by anything. But they were listening now. Amara Jenkins stood at the front of the room, her rebuilt prototype glowing softly at her side, her slides projecting a vision of a future powered by the everyday motion of human beings. She was no longer the girl who had to beg for the right to stay in school. She was the speaker whose name had been passed up the chain from a local science fair to city sustainability programs and now to national startup accelerators. And she was 16. As she spoke, she saw heads nodding. Not out of politeness, but understanding. Investment. Her words weren't just theory, they were possibility. Her design wasn't just impressive, it was scalable. Affordable. Urgently needed. She ended her presentation with a simple line. Power isn't always about who holds the switch. Sometimes, it's about who builds it. The applause was real. Loud. Earned. Afterward, she was swarmed, reporters, entrepreneurs, energy consultants. Some offered to fund her idea. Others offered internships, mentorships, visibility. For the first time, doors didn't creak open, they swung wide, and stayed open. Back at school, the shift was undeniable. She wasn't just the girl who won the science fair anymore. She was the girl who put Eastwick Prep on the map. Teachers bragged that they had taught her. Students whispered rumors about scholarships and patent lawyers. But Amara stayed grounded. She still walked the same halls. Still ate lunch quietly. Still fixed her braids in the bathroom mirror without looking up. What had changed wasn't how she moved through the world, but how the world could no longer ignore her when she did. Principal Hargrove, once eager to dismiss her, now went out of his way to mention her name at school board meetings. But she didn't need his validation. The recognition she received from her city, from engineers and activists and black women scientists who reached out to say thank you, I see you, meant more than his approval ever could. In the end, the real victory wasn't the trophy, or the newspaper coverage, or even the offers. It was this: she had stood on a stage she was never meant to reach, and she had lit it up, not just with electricity, but with a presence too powerful to dim. And everyone, from students to CEOs, knew Amara Jenkins wasn't just the future. She was already the light leading toward it.